How's it guys, Munash here, back with more Alliance War, and not a very long one today. I only did 3 fights in this war, but I felt like the last one was worth sharing because we finally got to take a high ground Magneto boss. But first we have 2 fights to get through, starting on part 8, a part that I'm not very familiar with. In fact, it's probably the part I've done the least out of all of them. But there's nothing too complicated here. They just placed a Venom on buff and balance power drain, return policy, and divine barrier. So usually when I see a Venom in war, the first counter I think of is Doom. However, this node combination is not the best for Doom, so it can kind of be a trap for him. Because with return policy, he'll gain power whenever you nullify, and Venom has a lot to nullify. So with Doom, you might need to avoid using special 1s or heavy attacks at certain times. Otherwise, you're just gonna have to bait a lot of specials. And with buff and balance power drain, it can be a bit tricky to get to that special too. So I brought Archangel since he doesn't nullify or need to use any special attacks. So it's just a simple parry heavy fight, and he does have suicide, so he's gonna start melting pretty quickly. And I only needed to bait 1 special 1. And I love how he got up at the end just to die. So that's my section 1, and now we're gonna move on to part 3 and section 2. Where we have a Vision Aarkus with enhanced armor up, Chitinous Thorns, cutting wires, and enhanced bleed. So we have a Vision Aarkus, basically. Because all these nodes are pretty much irrelevant since he doesn't have any armor up abilities. But I still had a slip up in this fight where I whiffed a heavy attack and then got parried. Yeah, I remember I was pretty tired when I did this fight. I think it was around 2 AM this morning. So I displayed some poor form at the start, but after that it was pretty much smooth sailing. And again, he had recoil, which just makes the fight significantly faster, especially because you have to bait a lot of special 1s. And it's pretty easy to punish with the heavy attack, which can be very convenient for Archangel. Plus, it's just good for keeping a safe distance, so you don't get that armor break and cold snap. And if you have a few Neuros on him, then Archangel can bypass that ability. So not too bad overall, and now we're gonna move on to the final fight, which is gonna be the Magneto boss with high ground. Oh, and I brought Quake as backup for a certain fight, but they didn't need it, so I just didn't use her this war. So as many of you know, Sorcerer Supreme is my go-to counter for Magneto bosses, and it's no different with high ground. In fact, she becomes even more valuable for this fight due to her high energy resistance. At rank 3 it's at 2150, which is enough to cut down the high ground damage you take in half. So I didn't have the best start to this fight because I was trying to bait a combo ender, but he kept on throwing a heavy attack with the unstoppable. So eventually I just backed myself into the corner and then did a corner intercept, and then throw a special 1 to get the region on block. And as you can see, I'm only taking 500 damage from high ground instead of the usual 1000. Then once I have the slow debuff as well, the fight becomes a lot easier to manage. So now I'm pretty much set up for this fight. Just gonna be throwing special 1s and 2s to maintain the effects. I think I had full uptime on the slow, then I had at least 2 armor breaks for about half of the fight, which does help with the damage quite a bit, especially when you're in the Fury phase, also known as Sidorak's Ferocity. And then I had no regen for about 20 seconds. So I could have optimized a little bit better and, try to maintain that a bit more. But ultimately, it didn't really matter. You don't have to be too strict with these things. As long as you can maintain a fairly aggressive playstyle so he doesn't get too many of those altitude charges. So I've taken many Magneto bosses with Sorcerer at this stage, but this was the first one with high ground, and honestly, it didn't really seem that much more difficult. Sure, he had suicides, but he only had double edge and no liquid courage. So the only real difference that made was 25% health loss from recoil, which is easy enough to make up for with boosts, but even without them, this should be a fairly comfortable solo. I know BMG fought a max boss with Sorcerer last season, and he made it look pretty easy, and there was a stage where he had I think 7 or 8 altitude charges, and the damage still wasn't even that bad with Sorcerer's high resistance. So I'm gonna have a good time next season if the opponent places Magneto bosses, maybe even try some different counters like Hyperion or Spidey 99, depending on what my parts may require, but Sorcerer will probably still be the go-to counter, or as I like to say, the GOAT to counter him. So yeah, that's pretty much it for this one. Hope you guys found this interesting, and as always, thank you for watching. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you soon.